If you've ever stared at a pile of specs and wondered whether any of them actually matter to the way you game, you're not alone. The biggest fear when dropping cash on a pre-built gaming rig is ending up with a machine that looks impressive on paper but stalls the moment you try to load the latest title, or that forces you to upgrade components you thought you'd already covered. I get that hesitation, especially when you're trying to stretch every dollar and you don't want to be stuck with a box that looks sleek but feels like a compromise. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The iBUYPOWER SlateMR is positioned as a ready-to-play desktop that promises a high-end CPU, a solid mid-range GPU, and fast storage, all wrapped in a chassis that's already had Windows 11 installed. At first glance, that sounds like the perfect entry point for someone who wants to dive straight into 1080p or 1440p gaming without spending evenings tinkering with BIOS settings. But does it really deliver on that promise for everyday players? Let's break it down from the perspective of using it day to day, not just from the spec sheet. First, the heart of the machine, an Intel Core i7-13700F. This is a 14-core, 20-thread processor that, according to Intel's benchmarks, handles modern AAA titles with ease when paired with a decent GPU. In practical terms, that means you can expect smooth frame rates in games like Cyberpunk 2077 or Elden Ring at medium-high settings, and you won't feel a bottleneck when you pop open a streaming tab or run a voice chat in the background. For a typical gamer who also watches YouTube tutorials while playing, the CPU gives you a comfortable buffer. The downside? The F suffix means there's no integrated graphics, so you're completely dependent on the dedicated GPU. That's fine for most builds, but it eliminates any fallback if the GPU ever needs to be swapped out for a quick test. Speaking of the GPU, the Slate comes equipped with an NVIDIA RTX 4060 Ti with 8GB of GDDR6. The 4060 slots nicely into the current generation of graphics cards for 1080p 1440p gaming. In real-world tests, you'll see it hovering around 70 to 80 frames per second in titles such as Fortnite or Valorant on high settings, and about 50 to 60 frames per second in more demanding games like Starfield when you push texture quality up. If you're the type who loves chasing 144Hz monitors, the card can sustain those high frame rates in many esports titles, making the SlateMR a solid fit for competitive players. However, it isn't a card that will comfortably push 4K at ultra settings. If you have a 4K TV and expect buttery smoothness on the most demanding titles, you'll eventually need to upgrade the GPU. So, the practical strength here is a great balance for mainstream resolutions, but the weakness is a ceiling that may feel limiting for future-proofing enthusiasts. Memory is another area where the SlateMR feels modern. 16GB of DDR5 at 5200 MHz may sound like a buzzword, but the speed translates to quicker load times and smoother multitasking when you have large game worlds and background apps open. I've noticed that even when launching a game that traditionally takes a minute or two to load, the boot time drops to under 30 seconds on this rig. That's a tangible benefit if you're the type who hates waiting for loading screens. The only caveat is that the system only ships with a single 16GB kit. If you ever plan to push beyond 16GB, say for heavy content creation or running multiple virtual machines, you'll have to open the case and add another kit, which may be a concern for people who aren't comfortable with DIY upgrades. Storage is where the SlateMR truly shines for most gamers. A 1TB NVMe SSD delivers rapid game installs, quick patching, and near-instantaneous level streaming. In practice, that means you can keep a sizable library of modern games on the drive without feeling cramped. SSDs also mitigate the stuttering that can happen when a title streams assets from a slower hard drive. The downside is the lack of an additional HDD slot. If you're a collector who maintains a massive archive of older titles, mods, or large video files, you'll need to find external storage solutions. For many players, the SSD alone will be enough, but the trade-off is a reduced flexibility for future expansion. Now let's talk about the overall user experience beyond raw performance. The system arrives fully assembled, with Windows 11 Home already installed and ready to go. That saves you the hassle of installing an OS, updating drivers, and configuring BIOS settings. For newcomers to PC gaming, this plug-and-play approach can be a lifesaver. The pre-installed OS also includes the Xbox app and Game Pass integration, meaning you can start streaming games from the cloud right away if you have a subscription. On the flip side, the preloaded Windows image may come with bloatware trial software, promotional offers, or unnecessary utilities that you'll have to trim out yourself. It's not a deal breaker, but it does add a small amount of post-purchase cleanup if you prefer a lean setup.